There might be difference in languages and variation of music, but contemporary art could transcend boundaries. We sat down with Philip Tinari, the curator of UCCA Center for Contemporary Art, to talk about the sparks and chemistry between Chinese and global contemporary arts. So when was your first time to experience the Chinese contemporary art?
Well, I got involved with Chinese contemporary art when I was a college student in the university in the US. And actually it was an artist who we made a big show with last year called Xu Bing, a major Chinese artist who was very fortunate, was making an exhibition at my school. I was at Duke University, and so I got to know him and got to help a little bit making the exhibition, and I fell in love with this topic of contemporary Chinese art. I just thought it was so fascinating.
So in what way do you think the Chinese contemporary art attracts you?
So I was kind of coming at it from two angles. One was this kind of very Western angle of art history, the development of art kind of from Greece and Rome through the Renaissance and all the way up until the modern period. And then the other was like my interest in China, because I was studying Chinese language and Chinese modern history and literature. So I was very fascinated by, the transformations that have happened in China really since the 1840s, especially since 1911 and since 1949. And I guess in the end, I found that contemporary art in China integrated all of these interests. So it was a way of looking at China today, but also a kind of where China fits in the bigger global picture. Because especially since the 80s, contemporary art has become a very global field. I always say UCCA is an institution kind of built out of this connection between China and specifically Europe, but the wider world. So we make exhibitions with Chinese artists, let's say first and foremost. I mean, being a leading institution in Beijing, I think a big part of our responsibility as a museum is to show the top Chinese artists in a great way, make them visible to a larger public, both locally and internationally.
When you take a stroll in Beijing's 798 Art Zone, a building with curtain-like French windows can immediately catch your attention. UCCA regenerated its building in 2019 with new inside structures and designs, which is able to bring you new experience of contemporary art.
It's only the columns now on the ground floor.
The avant-garde exhibitions in UCCA tell you that the presented forms of contemporary art have already gone beyond your imagination. How do you see the China's contemporary art, its change and its improvement and development all these years?
Yeah, so I always argue that contemporary art is one of the fields in which China really excels globally. Artists are always ahead of the trend. Artists are the avant-garde, right? So already in the 80s and 90s, you had Chinese artists who were participating in this global sphere. But that's accelerated so much in the last even just 5 years. So now you have even ordinary art workers, we call ourselves, right? People who work in galleries and museums, collectors who maybe come from banking or from entrepreneurs, other kinds of fields who come into this art world are almost immediately part of this big international community. I think it serves a very important diplomatic function in terms of China's conversation with the wider world, and one that kind of sometimes can't be had in more official ways. It's a people-to-people kind of exchange through this shared passion and love of art.
So what do you think is the main challenge facing China's contemporary art?
I think contemporary art has been a useful space because it allows for a kind of expression that is nuanced and layered and that is not direct. This is very important on a number of levels, but it's also, I think it kind of can illustrate the fact that in China there actually are a lot of different opinions. I think from the out, I'm a Westerner, people outside tend to think of China as too homogenous, right? And I think through art we can start to encounter a whole diversity of opinions. So I hope that can always be allowed to thrive.
Do you think the Western contemporary artists have enough understanding of China's contemporary art? Do you think there's misunderstanding?
Yeah, there's always misunderstanding and mistranslation, and sometimes mistranslation and misunderstanding can actually be productive or creative, right? So, I mean, a lot of the work that Xubing makes is about the kind of that funny space of mistranslation. You know, understanding is not a yes or no thing. There are so many layers of difference, and I think art is about that space of the non-binary and of difference.
So as a foreign curator, what's your special taste for art exhibition for UCCA?
Well, I really love to think about this global story of contemporary art in China. And I like to think about the moments when China arrived in the world and when the world arrived in China. So a lot of the artists that we show, there's a trend now which is just, let's take some big famous artist and sort of drop them down into China and then everyone can see how great they are. But I'm much more interested in what are the moments in this conversation, which has really been going on since the beginning of opening and reform in the late 1970s. And we really looked at this encounter. You know, what did he bring? How did it contribute to the conversation here? But also, what did he learn? What did he take away? And how did it impact what he did for the rest of his life?
So it's like mutual exchange.
Yeah. I mean, that's very much what we're interested in. In 2015, we made an exhibition with a South African artist called William Kentridge, who first showed in the Shanghai Biennale in 2000. And influenced the whole generation because he almost works in ink, brush. I mean, not in a Chinese way, but it's you know, ink and charcoal and these kinds of, you know, media that are very well known, and it's animation, so it's figurative drawing, so things that Chinese artists are very good at. And he influenced the whole generation, so people made animations, sometimes very inspired by his. I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to show his work here? And the context, you know, of South Africa during its transition from apartheid to the current situation. I'm very sensitive to the fact that, you know, maybe outside of China, they only know a few of China's contemporary artists. A lot of times they know them either because they're very vocal or because they're kind of market sensations, right? Because their paintings sell for a lot of money. So I'm interested to take the people who have really influenced the conversation here. And we're also going to have a program of what we call lecture performances. It's a very popular genre in contemporary art right now where artists give a talk, and the artists are often asked to give a talk, but they now can give talks that kind of also become a little bit like artworks in themselves.
原来这一辈子呢，艺术家是一直在不断地建造自己属于自己的一个闭合的一个圆。
So what do you think of the relationship between technologies and art? Do you think that one day technology can replace?
That's not to say I think technology can do so much for art, and I think artists can do so much with technology. I mean, we've done a lot of exhibitions of artists who are really working at the frontiers of technology, and we continue to, because that's, I think, the most interesting thing to explore right now. But I think it's always about, you know, how does that come back into the vision of art and of the artist.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 没事，我就放这儿就好。